wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast, Do We Want to Raise a Feminist Son?, is in response to a listener's question, which we're excited to dive into. Before we do, I would love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and on the homepage to scroll down and join our tribe. Joining our tribe connects you to us more deeply. It allows you access to our weekly email, which gives you wrap up of what we've podcast on, what we've posted about, what we've blogged about, with links and blurbs so you can pick and choose what you'd like to dive deeper into. And then occasionally we send you a second email that's more amusing, a personal conversation, a thought process, a processing during our week that we feel there's a toolkit or some learnings or something like that involved in that we would really love to share with you more deeply, knowing that you're just online with us. And we would love you to join our tribe. So please jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au. Now, today's podcast topic: do we want to raise a feminist son? It's a really juicy one, and I'm really excited actually to do this one with you, Bridge, because I know you've got such a feminine history kind of background to you as well. So I think this is a really interesting one, and a mother of a son. And this is in response to one of the women in our private members-only Facebook group had said, look, I'd really love you to podcast on this topic. She has quite a young son, and she'd said there's a few articles flying around in the media at the moment around, in inverted commas, entitled children, and therefore what are we raising in child-centred parenting styles that theoretically could raise an entitled child, and therefore a son who has a disrespectful outlook towards women, and how he therefore treats his mother and other women in his lives. So we read the articles that were posted, and we had quite a different take on them when Bridge and I were just sitting here spitballing about it. So we thought maybe we just dive in and see where we go.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think so too. I think it's just an interesting one because I guess I want to come at it a couple of different angles. We become what we surround ourselves with too. So if you are reading all this stuff and it's creating a sense of fear or a sense of anxiety or a sense of kind of determination to not have your son like that, then that's going to play into the dynamic that you're having with your child and the projection of what's right and wrong that your child is unconsciously picking up from you around their behaviour too.
Which is really interesting because this beautiful listener had also said, there's a bit of fear for me around my son turning out like this.
Yeah, and I really get that because as parents, there's certain ideals that we would love for our children, you know, for them to be respectful, for them to be whole people, for them to be connected to themselves, for them to respect the space and ideas and values of other people. But the reality is when we've got these buttons, these like emotional kind of triggers that we project upon in the future of our kids and think, oh, I don't want them to do that, or I hope that doesn't happen. On some level, that's almost calling that experience in as a teacher to us to help us see that perhaps the very thing that we were most fearing maybe isn't as bad as what we thought it would be, for example, or to love that part of ourselves more deeply that we are disowning and projecting into, you know, our children's future. So I always think that that's so interesting to look at the dynamic interplay between the mother and the child around these big discussions, like, you know, having a feminist son, and if you're seeking, you know, to raise a feminist son, then it's likely come from this perception of in yourself that something's missing, or that perhaps you had an experience growing up where you were disrespected as a woman, that you did feel like men or boys were mean to you, or you know, perhaps
disrespected you.
Yeah, perhaps were abusive, or you know, on some kind of level. And all of those things, I don't say for a second that those weren't real painful experiences that, you know, we don't intentionally want to send our children into. But at the same time, those very things that we face also become formative for us. They also become kind of threaded into the fabric of who we then go on to become and what we then go on to pursue and gift to the world through our experience. And so to try and parent from, I guess, a fear, which I think a lot of this is too, isn't it? It's parenting from a fear of something happening, so you then want to kind of have the toolkit and have the answers for how you can raise the child that's not that, the child that does respect women.
How you can step around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's as easy as that. And I think on some level, if you're running from it, you're going to run into it. And so what I would say, that's a kind of one angle. And then the second piece that I would say is, I don't want to raise a feminist son. I want to raise a humanist son and a humanist daughter, because I think that I want my children to, I want to both model for my children what it looks like to be a respectful human and to be a person that looks beyond, you know, beyond the kind of the confines of image and perhaps disablement or whatever it is, to see the true person. And I want that for both of my children, you know, male and female. So, and I get that the desire to raise a feminist son comes from this deep-seated perception in our world of the incredible
inequality, really.
Inequality, yeah, for women. And that comes from, you know, centuries of women being disenfranchised,
yes.
you know, economically, in every kind of way. And so the desire is for us to raise sons that really see women as empowered and see women as equal and all of those things. But I mean, all of that comes from what we model. All of that comes from our conscious and unconscious way we live. And it comes from the level, and it comes...
Hang on. I think there's a step before this. Do you mind if we do that?
Yeah, let's go there.
Because what I think I'd like to maybe just hash out first is, what does it mean to you to be a feminist? And therefore, what does it mean, in its very essence, just the words, to be a feminist man? What does that mean? So one, what is a feminist? Two, what is a feminist man for you?
You know, if you had have asked me this 5 or 10 years ago, I would have answered it with such confidence and such self-assuredness, perhaps even a level of self-righteousness. But now, as I take away, I suppose, those more materialist kind of physical, like, you know, grounded in society kind of labels of feminist, and look at more about our integration of our own feminine, our own masculine, and who we are, the less I'm sure of what that means in an abstract way, if you know what I mean.
No, I really do. I just really wanted to hash it out. I was interested.
Yeah, because now, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's really about dissolving any kind of label and genderedness, you know, around capacity and around ability to serve the world and ability to show up in the world. I mean, to me, it's that there shouldn't even be the need for the label, you know. And
except that I would imagine most feminists would argue there's a level of inequality which needs to be pointed out and pursued. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I also think we've got to tread carefully, because it's like that whole glass ceiling thing. If your daughter grows up from a young age constantly seeing that she has less opportunities because that's what her mother keeps on going on about, is this inequality and this pay disparity and this constant need to fight for what's not right, then I would argue that you almost begin life on the back foot, because you're beginning believing, or you're growing up bathed in this idea that you are lesser than, because it's being pointed out to you.
And so you're therefore filtering your world through the lens of
to see all
inequality.
of the examples of to simply see all of the examples of inequality. You know, and yes, we cannot disagree with the fact that there are pay disparities, no doubt about it. And we also know that there's certain behaviours that we see perhaps in a more masculine way that mean that men might go after pay rises better than women, and women might wait for permission perhaps more. But I mean, again, it's fluid, because we know that the more feminine man might behave like what the typical woman is, and the more masculine woman might behave like the more typical man does. So those are fluid in the way that they expressed in people. But then we love a box, so we're looking here at like the label between man and woman. Yes. And so I guess, I mean, a feminist, and my husband still ribs me on this, like he jokes with me about our daughter, and like when she's climbing all over the dishwasher, he's like, good, Sylvie, you know, make sure you learn how to do those dishes, you know, and he tries to rib me on it, because in the past that would have like really like triggered me, whereas now it's just a bit of a joke, because it's just not a hot button for me now, because I can see that what we're modelling for her is people living in alignment, people living in an inspired way, people standing up for what they believe in, as opposed for us having to you know, have a label on that. And I think, you know, kids get their message about men and women in the world through the lives that they see their parents lead. And that becomes the barometer for every other comparison that they make in the world, I think.
No, I agree with you, and I find that really interesting, actually, because it almost comes full circle, doesn't it, back to the point of doing your own personal development work, because how empowered you are as a woman, how fully you sit in your power as a woman, I imagine to some extent dictates the level of security you feel around your womanhood.
Yeah.
And therefore the fragility with which you can... is fragility the right word? I'm not sure. Emotional fragility maybe, or defensiveness around how much you need to defend being a woman or being powerful as a woman, and how much that's just a seated knowing for you. And therefore the way that you teach your sons and your daughters within your home, they're learning by watching you, right? So they're learning by feeling you, and they're learning by feeling you in the world, and they're learning what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a man by feeling you and those closest to them in their natural environment. So how powerfully you sit in yourself, I imagine to some extent dictates how fiercely, perhaps is the right word, you need to defend being feminist or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you'll know this if this is a challenge for you, because, you know, and this kind of dives into the elements of the developmental ages in boys too. And if you're a woman feeling really deeply challenged and powerless as your son grows and becomes more fierce in his as he expands his masculine, then that's not like your son's problem behavior that needs to necessarily be dealt with, but rather your own story of powerlessness in relationship to that aggression, masculinity, all of those things.
I really love that you brought this up, because I actually think this is the crux of the conversation.
Yeah, I do too.
And I really, yes, so I'm excited now, and I've lost my train of thought. I don't quite know where to go here. But I think you're absolutely right, is that it's as much for our daughters as it is for our sons, as they grow and they develop and they go through these influxes of hormones and autonomy that comes with that growth. It really starts to press new boundaries and new buttons for you. And the fact that they're displaying a behaviour, it's not the behaviour that's the problem. It's the fact that you have a problem with that behaviour is kind of hinting at the sweet spot of soreness or tenderness that's sitting yonder back in your years, that's reflected in that, which I actually think is perfect, because when you don't have a trigger on this particular behaviour, the behaviour is no longer a problem, and you're able to really move through it quite fluidly. Yeah. It's only a problem that you think you need to fix or change or mediate when you yourself have not yet healed from, you know, the mirrored experience for you that sits further back. I know had a direct experience of this yesterday, so maybe we'll talk about a few stories and then see where we're at.
Yeah, sure. As we were hashing out this theme before we started recording, I was like, I've got a scratch right here, do you want to see it? Because my son is 4.5 and has big feelings. You know, he's really coming into that development of his masculine. He is, I know, going through a testosterone surge.
So what do you say when we say, I think we need to be less vague, so when you say you're seeing a surge of him coming into his masculine?
I'm seeing it physically, and I'm seeing it emotionally and mentally. So physically in the way his body is changing, I'm seeing it mentally in terms of how he's constantly wanting to be the winner. He's wanting to be first. He's really wanting to look at competition. He's got a real competition kind of drive going on. He's role-playing superheroes a lot. Yeah. Goodies and baddies. Just a lot of that real kind of boyish, behaviour. And at the same time, emotionally, he's finding the edges of like uncontrollable anger. Anger where he's trembling, and anger where I can see he doesn't know what to do with. And so those to me are like hallmarks of really coming into this surge of not only the hormones but the development. And then I look at the psycho-spiritual kind of development of the coming of age too. So it's happening in lots of different ways for him, and I can see that he he's probably loving it, but also really not knowing what to do with it at the same time. And of course, then that's reflected back to me and my own like kind of capacity to hold that for him and make those things okay.
What does that mean to you, to hold that for him and make those things okay?
Is to really play it out with him, you know, like sit with, okay, my initial reactions to how some of the things, as I even heard myself this morning, like saying to him, doesn't always have to be competition. Like, what if you don't have to win, you know?
That's such a feminine thing to say.
Yeah, you know, and then I'm thinking,
it doesn't have to be winners.
Yeah. And I'm like, why don't
you just have an equal society?
Universal income for all. I read that somewhere today. And so, you know, and I was thinking, yeah, but just go with it, right? Like, so then I told myself, no, just be what he needs you to be to play this out. You know, and so I sat more back in that and let him kind of drive the play and whatever we were doing.
So you were the loser, he was the winner?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And he, like, caught the ball way more many times than I did.
Yeah. And way better.
And, like, he always gets in the bath first, so he's never allowed in the bath first.
Yeah,
you know, and that's also the sibling dynamic coming into it too. So that's kind of one aspect, and the other piece, I mean, there's so much interesting stuff going on with him at this age, compounded by the fact that he's got, you know, a 1-year-old sister who's now infringing on his space too, and so he's staking more claim onto what's his as well. But I find it so interesting to look at him and his development, his behaviour and his personality expanding, and then noticing within myself my own beliefs and judgments and triggers around that, and trying to find the space in between those two things, because that's where like the beauty is, and that's where we, I think, really allow our kids to become their whole selves, when we can sit as much as possible in the space in between who they are and how we feel about who they are, or what they're displaying.
Have you got a more tangible experience of that?
Probably the scratching incident.
Yes, can you talk us through that a bit more?
Yeah. So
the space in between.
Yeah, the space in between.
What was that for you yesterday?
Well, it all came about, I mean, I think it's like that the broken cookie, right? So he wanted these cereal cluster things, I just think are so full of sugar, and I don't want him having them every day, so I set the limit, no, you're not having those. And then we just had this big misunderstanding and had this, basically this kind of, I was trying to be firm about something and he was not having it, so he was grabbing stuff and throwing it off the bench, and I just kept kind of holding the limit, to the point at which we were kind of then down on the ground, and I was trying to kind of physically hold him, just to try to help him kind of,
because he was getting
getting wild.
Yeah.
And then he like pushed me away with his fierceness and anger, like an animal in his face, and he like lashed out and scratched my face, just as a way to try and get me away from him. And I really checked in with myself, and I thought, wow, like, yeah, I'm still here. Like, I'm not triggered here. I'm still with this. I'm still holding this. And that to me is the space in between. That to me is the ability to be with their experience in such a way that I'm not triggered and called to have a power thing with him. You know, that I'm not triggered so much that I am kind of in there with him in the mess of it, called into my kind of animal state. I was almost like the safe harbour for him in that. And believe me, I am not always. And there are some things that go from 0 to like 100 in a split second, and they're my triggers I got to work on in different scenarios than this. But this is the one scenario that when I can go, okay, I can see he needs to release here. He's got lots of stuff going on. I'm going to just hold this for him and be kind of the space that he can crash against.
As opposed to,
you know, and I wonder if this might be the experience of some people who are confronted by this kind of behaviour. That, you know, that's not okay to be rough with me. You know, you need to behave yourself. I'm scared right now. That's just not on. Like, you know, all of that kind of stuff that comes from a fear. You know, comes from a sense of powerlessness and a desire to control what we are afraid of. A desire to control and save ourselves from what's happening, from what our child's demonstrating to us. And I mean, I would suggest so much of that for us is our inner child coming out. It's not the parent with the rational brain online knowing that they've got this. It's the child within us needing to quickly make that go away, because that's not safe.
So can I play devil's advocate here?
Sure.
So based on this article that we read, one in particular by Michael Greg Carr, and by a couple of comments from in-laws of some of the women that have done our Loathing to Loving, and, you know, when we're, or was it a line parent, can't remember which, and we were having discussions about the judgment of feeling judged when you're in a moment of wildness with your child and you have in-laws or someone around you.
Yeah.
So the experience of the in-law seems to be echoing to some extent the writings of Michael Greg Carr in this particular article, which was pretty much, you let them get away with blue murder and you're developing an entitled child. So how do you feel in response to that, given in this situation there was no consequence, there was no boundary in the sense of, you know, don't do that, you can't do that, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, there was definitely a, I'm not going to let you hit me boundary.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so that was definitely there.
So maybe I'll just stop talking. What do you say in response to that? So let's say, you know, you are one of our listeners and they've got their in-laws there going, you are messing this child up. Like, you are creating an entitled monster here. Like, what would you say in response to that?
Well, I think I would say go and look at the brain science and look at what your expectations are of the ability in which a 4-year-old is able to self-regulate their behaviour, because I don't believe that when they're in that state that they can get themselves back without help. And help is not shutting down the feelings and making the feelings wrong. Help is providing a grounded, safe space where you yourself feel safe. So you can't do this if you don't feel safe. You have to feel safe to be able to hold this space, or then you are not a safe environment.
You're not a safe person. You're not the anchor anymore.
You're not an anchor. You know, and likely you wouldn't be there if you weren't feeling safe, because you would have shut it down before you were able to feel safe in it. But, I mean, I'm not going to allow myself to get scratched and hit. That just happened because I didn't catch his hands in time and I didn't move out of the way in time. But I also wasn't going to get angry and blame him and go in like a shame spiral over him hurting me, because I'm not going to judge his ability to hold himself when he's 4 years old and hasn't even got the brain development to come back. And a lot of adults don't even have, like, you know, that capacity yet.
Absolutely.
You know, I found myself in wild moments where I wanted to kind of claw someone, you know, and so I'm not going to put that on my 4-year-old to try and, you know, to blame and shame him with his behaviour. So I would really stand pretty firmly. And I mean, I know my own mother sometimes can feel really, like, challenged by some of his big feelings. And would go to distraction, or would go to
does your mother have issues with the way, issues, you know, in commas, with the way you handle him in those moments? I
wouldn't say issues, but she has a level of uncertainty around
what sort of child that creates.
Not even that, around, like, I don't know that she has an uncertainty about what sort of child that creates, but rather how long to let it go for, or kind of what to when to kind of be firm about it. But then I have seen her see how much this has worked, and now see her using it herself. So, but there were certainly times where I'm sure she just, like, went out of the room or just took herself away from it because it was too confronting. And I get that, right? Like, if I had seen this 3 years ago or whatever and didn't quite know what was going on, I would have behaved probably like it had been modelled to me. Like, that's enough, stop crying, you know, get over it, but, you know, whatever it was to make that stop.
So you've put in a boundary in terms of you're physically holding his arms to protect yourself, to keep you safe, and saying words like, I'm not going to let you hurt me.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, but that's all in a very calm manner, firm but calm.
Firm but calm.
And then you're allowing him the processing of those emotions. So how are you doing that?
So at that point, it wasn't long after he had been doing it wasn't long after I'd been scratched and he was kind of clawing at me, that he got to the very edge of the anger, and the anger melted away into tears. Because so often the anger is masking hurt and pain. Yes, it is. And so, and what I knew by staying with him in that and being able to hold that space for him, I knew that we would eventually get to the tears, because what we always do with Hugo. And so, probably 2 seconds after he scratched me, the face completely changed, and he melted into tears and crawled into my lap. And that for me was affirming again how much it is powerful when we have the capacity within us to stay with the feelings, to stay with this hard stuff, and know that that's just what they need from us to help them move through the things that they can't understand. you know, and that are building up. And I don't need to ask him what that was about, why he was feeling like that, what happened. I just need to make it safe for him to come back into himself. And later we talk about what happened. And, you know, how, like, you know, look, like, you know, you're obviously so angry, like, you know, I've actually got a scratch. And don't point that out to him in a way that is punishing or shameful, but rather helping him to see what it's like when we get so out of balance or we actually hurt other people. And that's a conversation that I'm probably better at having when I'm the one who gets hurt versus if it was his sister. Because then I'm way more triggered, you know, and that's a whole other thing to delve into. And I think the sibling thing is in some ways a more nuanced conversation because there's so much in that. But I'm thinking about it, in some ways, for me, this is almost how to raise a feminist son, right? Because making all feelings safe, making the full spectrum of tears and anger safe, is encouraging the growth of an integrated person who's both sides of feeling, you know, masculine strength and power and anger and aggression and feminine softness, tears and, you know, not stereotypically feminine, right? You know, making both of those things safe in some ways maybe that's almost raising a feminist son, and perhaps means that if they've been raised to believe that their feelings are not something to be shoved down or shamed or disowned, then perhaps they're not going to need to explode in some of the ways that some sectors of society fear in the masculine does. I don't know. That just came to me as a concept. I mean, what does it mean for you to, you know, this concept of how to raise a feminist son?
Yeah.
Or should we be raising a feminist son?
Yeah. No. Because I totally agree with you. I actually love what you said about raising humanist children or people, because I actually think that is the absolutely what we should be aiming for in any of our parenting goals. You know, should be, how do we actually get to that point where we have these beautiful integrated souls who honor the masculine as much as they honor the feminine. Because when we're really seeking to make our boys see women and see their power and respect women and, you know, hold them up on a pedestal, or that women can do things better than men, or whatever the case may be, at the same time as having those conversations, we're degrading the masculine. We're absolutely cutting it off at the balls, if you like, and saying there's so much about the masculine that's wrong. And the more we make the masculine wrong, the more the shadow side of the masculine needs to rear its head, right? So it's kind of, for me, it's you know, and we've spoken about before, and one of our listeners had said, I'd loved in the podcast, The Challenge of Our Gender, we kind of touched on this in raising our children, was how do we raise boys that love their masculine as much as they love their feminine, and therefore can filter that out into this world, because the more they love what's within them, the more they can love what's outside of them, is only, you know, creating issues internally if they have issues with themselves internally, right? Which is what you're pointing at in your end comment there.
That's it. I mean, and I think that's everything, right? Like, you know, we only struggle with our outer world to the extent that which we're struggling with reconciling that within us.
Yes. So when I think about my son, you know, and I've been to so many over the years, so many Raising Boys seminars, and I think I've seen Steve Biddulph maybe 3 times. And I've probably read his book twice. You know, and there's quite a number kind of floating around that I've certainly visited as well. And I kind of think there's bits and pieces I've taken from them. So Steve Biddulph really does talk about, in Raising Boys, the role of the father really stepping up at this time. So, you know, pre-4, it's very much mother-centred, and then post-4, dad definitely, or whoever is the male role model within your family unit or extended family unit, needs to take a much stronger role in stepping up into that. So he does make a point of, in these moments when a son has physically hurt his mother, that it is the father's role to step up and say that is not okay. That he's role modelling respect for the feminine or for the woman within that household by stepping up in that. So you know, in those situations, look, I've certainly had those situations with my son as well over the years. And so the way that we've gone about that is that then my husband and I have an open dialogue about that. After I've handled my son in probably a very similar way to what you have, I will ring my husband and just kind of go, look, Blair, here's what's happened. So when you get home tonight, you know, we need to, this is on your radar, we need to talk about this. So he walks in prepared and ready to have those conversations. And so he will and if he's home, he will automatically now very firmly step into that situation, and he will be incredibly firm, and he will be to some extent the scary, roaring masculine.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's okay.
And my husband's been stepping into that space a bit more too now, and I've been sitting with how I feel about that, because my son...
How do you feel about that?
Well, my son's struggling with it a bit. Like, you know, he's a couple of times...
It's another side of dad,
yeah,
right?
It's another side of dad. And
seeing the soft side of dad.
He's so used to the soft side. And just today and another day, he's had some really big sad feelings about it, and grumpiness. Like, what Daddy just said was mean. I didn't like what Daddy said. And I was like, yeah, you know, it can be hard, kind of. But Daddy was feeling really angry.
And this is a equilibrating dad too.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see how they can then respond to that. Because my husband was the same about seeing this Steve Biddulph thing, and that's one thing that he really took from that.
Yeah.
And I mean, even today, and it can work in various ways. Like Marcus always says, he calls everyone, like, you know, me and Hugo and Sylvie, like, beautiful. And so, Marcus makes a lot of a point around using that language around me. And so Hugo today was like, oh, Daddy, why do you always call Mum beautiful Bridge? And like, that was a great opportunity for Marcus then to speak about me and my role as you know, his partner and Hugo's mum, and, you know, these are all the conversations and the modelling behaviours that get imprinted as well, which in this case I love.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. But it's totally that. Yeah. And it's, again, seeing the full spectrum of what the masculine is. Yeah. The masculine is fierce as much as it is gentle and loving. Same as the feminine is fierce and scary as much as it is gentle and loving. Like, don't get into this thing that the feminine is just soft and floppy and the masculine is hard and scary.
And I mean, and those are the most basic of stereotypes.
But not even accurate, right? Yeah, no. Because they're both. Yes. You look at any god or goddess, or, you know, spectrum in family time, in history, and you will see that there's goddesses of, you know, death, and there's goddesses of birth. And the same for the masculine, because we're both. So the fact that they get to see both is actually what allows them the opportunity to equilibrate both and bring both in, rather than needing to shut the door on one and make it wrong, and therefore we're dealing with the shadow aspects of that. Yeah. So, you know, so back on raising a feminist son. So I think it is all of those things. I think it is what we role model ourselves. It's the relationship and the conversations that we allow them to see and witness, the way in which we speak to each other, my husband and I, your husband and you, and the way in which they learn what a functional relationship looks like. And how we handle maybe anger, how we handle you know, things we're not happy about with each other, and how we actually integrate both of those in a conversational way. They learn from all of that. So in raising a feminist son, I feel that my job is to display feminine power in a way that feels authentic and aligned with me. So the more rooted within myself I can become, the stronger I feel about myself, the more I can show up in this world, the more I can express with loving ferocity the full spectrum of who I am, the more he learns and feels and knows the power of the feminine. I don't need to tell him about it. I don't need to say to him, this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do, because him and I are in a soupy dynamic where he vicariously learns that. Now, he is also now in a family where he has 3 sisters. So he learns vicariously through his sisters as well. He learns through the way that they interact. He learns constantly when we're having, you know, sibling, you know, issues and rivalry and all of that. I will make the point of pointing out, can you see in your sister the effect of what you have done has had on her? What do you see? Because the masculine can tend to want to, you know, win, annihilate, and just shoot past it. So this is part of that breeding empathy thing, right, is bringing in the softness into the masculine. And part of that is witnessing, do you see when you said this, how it had this effect? And trying to make that tangible link, I think, is actually what also starts to create awareness that we're seeking when we're saying we want a feminist son. We're saying we want a man who is aware of women, who loves the feminine, who loves women, who, you know, is... I can hear her screaming. I'm going to need to feed her.
Yeah.
Okay, so I paused the recording. Now I'm back feeding a baby.
And she's making the most sweetest little sounds.
Sorry, I'd stretched her a little bit till I was like, sorry, Bridget, I have to go get her. Okay, so now I'm in a calmer space. I can get back on topic. Get back on topic, Julie. Okay. Raising a masculine son. No, feminist son who is masculine. See, my brain's not even working. So that's actually what I think we mean when we're saying we want a feminist son. To some extent, we're saying we want this new agey kind of man, right?
Yeah.
This awakened masculine version of masculinity who is able to stand firm and strong in their masculine and be all of the things we want a man to be, but also to be able to show up emotionally, to recognise women, to validate who we are, to validate what we do, to not look down upon, you know, house duties or, you know, whatever the case may be. We're saying we want a man who really sees us. And the masculine is really able to do that when we're really able to do that. So do I have to say to my son, yeah, I work and yes, I'm worth something? Or does he automatically see that because I'm sitting very integrated in that sense of worth and that is reflected by his dad? I don't need to say it to him.
It's that question, is it that whole thing, do you fight for it or do you embody it?
Oh, that's perfect. I love that sentence. It is absolutely that. So raising a feminist son for me is absolutely getting comfortable with all sides of feminine and masculine and really teaching them how to handle themselves in conflict and in communication. Oh, that was a bit much milk, wasn't it? Yeah. Sorry, everyone. Oh man, I'm completely losing my train of thought. Bridge, get me back on.
It's because you're so enveloped in the feminine now because you're feeding your darling daughter.
Yeah.
I think it's really around for you. What are the pinnacle conversations that you go back to, or the pinnacle values that you go back to now that you know, particularly you have a son who is going through the raging hormones of the masculine, who is probably for the first time really identifying himself and also his relationship, who he sees himself as in relationship to women.
Yes. So what I've noticed is the more I love his masculine, which is what you're saying when you're saying when you're witnessing your son display very masculine traits, the more I love the display of that, the less it's an issue. Because the more you can recognise the beauty of it and the perfection of it, the less you're feeling bristled by it. Yes. So, like the competitiveness, I've spoken about this many times, it just gets, it just stacks. It all just stacks one on top of the other. So we muck around with the competitiveness. I absolutely rib him now about it. So we kind of, I guess, trash talk a little bit about it. Yeah. And being able to make light of it kind of allows you the opportunity to touch on perhaps the topic we're talking about is, how do you not become so pumping yourself up that you're this, epitomized.
Entitled.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is I think for men they really work incredibly well with not so much the deep and meaningful eye contact conversation, but they work really well with a bit of humour, with a bit of play around it. So with our younger boys we can play around it, right? Which is what you're saying. Yeah. As they get older, that play develops more into, playing the sport they're into ribbing them when you're playing it with them, into these kind of, I guess, more teenage-esque kind of, conversations that really allow you just to enjoy them. I think it's the enjoyment of it. The masculine doesn't need to be taken down a peg or two. It just needs to be loved and welcomed. Yeah. And how do you love and welcome someone that you bristle to? You look at why you're bristling to it. And if you know why you're bristling to it, then you no longer need to bristle to it.
Yeah, because it's taught you what it's needs to be.
Yeah, and then you can just love it. So what used my husband jokes now because he used to call me, the kumbaya basketball coach. Because I was all love and peace and everybody we're just there to just, build relationships and, learn more about ourselves and blah, blah, blah. And now, 5 years down the track of being a basketball coach, I'm like, get out there and win. I'm like, this husband's like, who are you? I'm like, yeah, I know, it's really changed. But I've also, because over that 5 years, my son has really taught me a lot, right? Because back then I was judging winning and losing. I was judging all of those things about inequality.
Did you want everyone to get a trophy?
Yeah, probably totally was one of those parents, right? Is that the
Everyone gets
winning
a trophy.
and the the fallout from losing and all of that stuff. So we used to play a lot of board games, which always felt different to me to work with those edges of winning and losing. Particularly, that's what we used to do a lot around when my son hit that 4-year-old thing, is to help him cope better with losing, was to play card games and board games quite regularly.
Yeah.
And the more we played them, the more comfortable he became with losing. So you know how when they're in that age, often we play games where they always win.
Yes.
And so losing or not getting their way starts to become really emotionally hard.
Yeah.
And so when we were hitting that edge, we started to play around with it. So, you're playing with your edges of, well, now you don't always win. Now sometimes I'm going to win.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm going to be stronger than you in that wrestle.
And I mean, you know this intuitively, that this is the next stage you need to go to when they become so reliant upon what they've always known. Like they become so reliant on winning and almost seem like if they don't win, then there's something wrong. Like,
yes,
that's almost when you need to change something.
Yes,
because there's become a dependency.
Hit that edge again. Yeah,
on that.
So I think loving the masculine is loving all of those parts, because there's so much that's just delightful about it. So the competitiveness also turns into the ferocity of the masculine that wants to protect the feminine. It's that real warrior. Part of the masculine, which I adore. I think it's divine. So why would I want to wheedle that out? And the part of the masculine that wants to be the best and pump itself up is the part that believes in itself.
Yeah.
The part that knows it wants to get that job and gets it because it has total belief.
Yeah.
So why would I want to be the person that takes that out of him?
And I would be really careful that this whole theme of this article is all about this entitlement. Be careful that you don't crush spirit.
Yes.
In your desire not to raise an entitled child.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there is a way to ensure that a child grows up with a responsibility.
Yes.
With their own self-belief and spirit intact.
Yes.
Because I can see how it'd be very, very easy to start to pull down, take that masculine,
particularly in Australia with this tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah.
As soon as someone excels at something, we want to cut them off at the knees and make them not as good. So we find lots of reasons why they're not as good. So this is a conversation we have a lot of, because now my son's hit an age where they're in that teenage years and they're all trying to work that out. It's a bit like the hen's pecking order in the playground. And then he sometimes brings that behaviour home, as he did the other, I think it was only yesterday, with his sister. So she'd gone, they were both shooting hoops together, and she'd said, I think maybe I'm like best or second best on my team at the moment. And Heath's automatically just cut her down. And so then she had this big emotional reaction, and we came out and had a conversation about it, because at school, that's what's happening. They pump themselves up and then someone brings them down. So I can see the purpose in it in terms of equilibrating themselves, and that's a play with that. But at the same time, there's an edge to it that you can work around, that we can celebrate other people without it meaning that you are less.
Yes.
So that's a conversation we constantly have, is just because someone else is amazing doesn't mean that you are not as amazing. And that in fact strength is celebrating that as opposed to not. And that applies to this topic with feminine and masculine.
I mean, those are conversations that can begin early and continue throughout their whole childhood. I mean, we've just started that around Hugo being amazing at Lego and super fantastic at it, but can't really catch a ball. And so this is the thing, every single kid has some kind of genius.
Absolutely.
And no one's genius is better than anybody else's.
No.
And it's all about, and so we're practicing looking for it in other people.
Yes.
What's like your job.
Which is great with boys and girls, because how can it be, I can't play with girls because they don't, I don't know, play Batman as well.
They don't play Batman as well. Or they don't want to play Lego.
Yes, right, yeah. So it's the same conversation though, isn't it?
Yeah.
How are you having that conversation with Hugo at the
They're talking about, so you really love Lego and Batman, but what does Alice really love? Oh, she just likes princesses. oh, okay. So and this is the thing, right? It's a very like, oh, that's just girlish.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which I'm still finding the edge around.
Yeah.
How to work through that.
Yeah.
And not make that lesser than.
Yeah.
Because I also don't want to force down his throat stuff he's not interested in.
Yeah.
But what I do want him to do is begin to recognise that other people have different interests that are no less important than his own. Which, I mean, even as adults, a lot of us struggle with. So, like, it's a constant conversation.
But just to have the awareness, though. Like, we don't always get it, but having the awareness that we don't get it is actually the whole point,
that's
though,
right.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and that's perfect for this conversation of raising a feminist son, is how does the masculine love the feminine? Well, it's because you can start to see values at play. You can start to see how loving that particular thing serves this particular girl or woman, how that creates within them who they are and the genius they have. And so that's no less than so this is all stacking layer upon layer of conversation over the years of development around loving the spectrum within everyone that you see around you, which then in turn allows you to love that within yourself. I think this is all the same conversation.
It is.
Ultimately, isn't it?
It's love of self.
It is love of self. And in your kids, just enjoy it. Like, I kind of think, we've hit so many edges. And I think I'd said to you on many podcasts before, so they hit it at 4, they hit it at 8 or 9. We're kind of starting to hit an edge again now, I think, as he's headed towards 12. So that 12, 13 thing, I imagine we'll hit another edge coming up. So stay tuned. And each time you hit it, it gets hard. It gets hard because you've never done it before. And you have to face another layer of yourself and your story and your beliefs about the masculine, possibly the way the masculine has treated you in the past that's being reflected through your kids. But the thing is, when you work out a toolkit through that, they actually are just these beautiful beings, and it becomes super fun. Like, it's lovely. I love the masculine in my son because I love the masculine within my husband because it's a practice for me to love it, because I didn't always love it. I was definitely one of those people that fought for the right to be seen and valued as a woman.
Yeah.
And I realised I didn't have to fight so hard, I just had to embody it. And it was automatically witnessed and revered. The less you start fighting, the more you embody it, the more the masculine responds to it. Yeah. Which is almost counterintuitive to the way that we are taught, because I grew up with very much a feminist mother who certainly had her own story of repression, and then moved into a all-girls high school where it was very feminist driven and, being as good and, putting the boys down and, this castration of the masculine, which the Queen's Code certainly talks about, proliferates through our society. And as soon as I could see that and worked on the practice of loving the masculine and communicating with the masculine, the more effortless it becomes to love that in our children.
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
don't you think?
Yeah, I really agree.
So how do you raise a feminist son? I'm hoping that we've kind of, through conversation and story, darted around this topic for you. And if there's something in particular that you thought we were a bit vague on, we would love you to talk to us about it, and we would love to dive a little bit deeper into it. But in essence, it's the whole work of making the entire spectrum within yourself safe, of creating the safety of those triggers so that you can hold that for your children, and therefore once they've moved through it, they hopefully don't need to express it for you again. And it's starting to love the masculine around you and the feminine within you that creates the spaciousness and the holding for the resonance that comes with that. So, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, because I think we've really kind of broadly encapsulated what it is, and I don't know what people thought when they clicked on this, whether this was going to be the story and kind of toolkit and theory that we would espouse, but I think it, like so much that challenges us in the world, like so much that we set out to do in the world, all of it is teaching us to learn and to love and grow ourselves. And our children's exploration into themselves is no different to that. So that's really what I would like to leave people with. So please connect with us on nourishingthemother.com.au. Please rate or share any of our podcasts that have really resonated with you, and certainly go back and have a look at the various podcasts that relate to this sort of topic of raising boys and the feminine and the masculine, to really integrate yourself with the polarities. Will be really worth even re-listening to those, I think. And then if you've got any questions, please drop us a private message through Instagram or Facebook, or an email through our website, because we love to continue the conversations and we really want this podcast to be a resource for you.
the, you know, conscious woman who is on this path to really just awaken more of what's possible within herself and her motherhood. So please join our tribe and, you know, get friendly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
and to
you.
connect with you, Bridge.
Yes, suburbansandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
Here's thepleasurenutritionist.com. And thanks again for listening to our rantings in between my breastfeeding foggy brain and, you know, baby and all sorts of stuff. So thanks for hanging in there. And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.